It is such a joy to be together this morning, singing. One of the reasons that we pray for different countries, we do it because we want to be a praying church. We do it because we want to have a big picture vision of what's going on in the world in terms of the gospel going forth. But one of the other reasons that I find from my own heart that we pray about these things, that we tell stories about what the Lord is doing, is because it's easy to read the news, to look around and go, it's all going pear-shaped. It's all going wrong. What's happening with the church as well? And actually, the church is doing just fine. Those who love and trust Jesus, who belong to him, and he knows who are his, the church is doing just fine. The gospel can't be stopped. And so we pray for these things because we do care, because things aren't hard, but also to remind ourselves that actually, this is not our battle in one sense. This is the Lord's battle. He's fought. He's already won. And just to come back to prayer meeting, we have prayer meeting every other Tuesday night. We were online. We were 3 of us in person and about 5 of us online. And it was hard at the beginning, but actually by the end, it was like, it was really, really encouraging. So I encourage you to join us for that if you can as well. We read from Galatians. We're in the book of Ruth. I just suddenly went, Ruth, we have a Ruth. That's wonderful. We're in the book of Ruth, and we're thinking about Advent through the book of Ruth, because the book of Ruth has this theme through it about the kinsman redeemer. We're gonna camp out on that idea this morning, as we think about, because that's what we're gonna do. Chapters 2 and 3. We're gonna cover a lot of ground. We did chapter 1 last week. We looked at Naomi in this place of desolation, returning to Bethlehem after having been in Moab. And she says in the end of the chapter, don't call me Naomi, which means sweet, but call me Mara, which means bitter. She's empty. She's returned empty. She's a widow. She's got massive debt. She's got to sell her lands that belong to her family. She's in trouble. And yet the Lord is going to do something in their lives. And so we read from John this morning as well. The light comes into the darkness. And that's a little bit of what we're going to see this morning, is that the light comes into the darkness. So we're going to sort of walk through the story together. We're going to talk a little bit about various parts, but 3 really important moments throughout, and I'll sort of point them out to you as we go. Let me just start and read the first 3 verses in Ruth Chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. Now Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him, in whose sight I shall find favor. And she said to her, go, my daughter. So Ruth set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to come to a part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. And so Ruth and Naomi have come back to Bethlehem. They're in trouble. They're widows. Ruth is a foreigner. So they're the lowest they're at the bottom of the pile, if you will. And the author of Ruth points out at the beginning of chapter 2, Naomi has a relative, a worthy man called Boaz. And that's the author's way of saying, keep your eye on this fellow. He's going to come back. He's important. We sort of know the story, so we know that he's important. But that's the literary way of saying, hey, watch out for this guy. And it calls him a worthy man. That word worthy is normally used of warriors, in other words, he's the knight in shining armor, if you will. He's a good man. Remember, we talked about Barnabas in Acts a couple of weeks ago. Barnabas was a good man. Boaz he's a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, who is Naomi's deceased husband. So he's important because he's got family ties. Keep your eye on him. And then we see Ruth, the widow and the foreigner. The author is at pains to point out Ruth the Moabite, Ruth the Moabitess, Ruth who came from Moab, Ruth who is a widow, who is a foreigner. Ruth, he keeps pointing this out to us. And Ruth herself is aware of it. She knows where she stands in society. She's at the bottom. She's a widow, she's a foreigner, and they are trying to eke out an existence. And so 3 points this morning. We're going to look at this idea of the romance of redemption, and we'll delve into that a little more later on. But this first idea is that Ruth she's ready for redemption. She's ready for redemption. And what we're going to see here is that she's ready for it because she's trusting in the God of redemption who provides for all her needs. And so in these first opening verses, what we're seeing is a picture of a woman and her mother-in-law who are ready because they're in need. They have a need that needs to be met. They're ready because they're in need. And so Ruth counts on the Lord in her need. She says, let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain. There was provision made in Deuteronomy chapter 24 and verses 19 through 21 that God says, when you harvest your field, when you harvest the grain, anything that you miss, don't go back and pick it up, but leave it for the orphan and the widow and the stranger, the foreigner. Leave it for them. There's provision made. Actually, there's more, and there were some other laws in other countries, but Israel by far had the most provision made for those who were at the bottom of the pile, as it were. And so Ruth begins immediately by trusting the Lord to provide for her by taking advantage of the laws that he had put in place. She counted on his provision through the law of the land. She does the obvious thing. We need food, we're here, we don't have much, I'm going to go and glean. Verse 3 says, she sets out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and she happened to come to the part of the field. There's a lot of irony or sort of subtle pointing out of detail. She just happened to come. Literally, it says, she chanced to chance upon. I mean, could the author get any more obvious? She chanced, it just happened. It was an accident. What sort of coincidence? It was a coincidence. And the author paints this wonderful picture of this, from a human point of view, things often look like coincidence. We chanced to chance upon. But the author is saying, listen, actually from God's point of view, there is no such thing. And we live in that tension as believers, as followers of Jesus, that there's human stuff happening. It's messy. It's complex. It looks like an accident, like a coincidence. But actually we know that God is at work. She chanced to chance upon the field of Boaz. The field of Boaz. And so Ruth is ready for redemption because she has a need. We've seen that. But she's also ready because she's trusting the God of Israel. We saw that because she's already trusting in his provision in the laws of the land. But she's also ready because she's trusting him in a much bigger way than that. And so Ruth goes out. I'm going to just walk through the story briefly. She goes out and she asks the foreman in charge of the field, can I glean here? And he says, yes. And then Boaz, here he comes. The author says, behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem. You can see him. Oh, and here he comes now. Boaz, the guy I told you to keep your eye on. Here he comes and he notices Ruth. He seems like he knows his people. He greets them, the Lord bless you, and they greet him in return. It seems like he cares for those who work for him. And then he immediately notices Ruth. He notices her. And he asks the foreman, who is this young lady? And he says, that's the Moabitess. That's the young woman who came back with Naomi. It's a small town. This is a family. Everybody knows about her at this point. And she's got a good reputation. And the foreman says she's been working hard in verse 7. She's been working hard all day. She's continued from the early morning until now, except for a short rest. She's a hard worker. And so Boaz says to her in verse 8, now listen, my daughter, do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn. So Boaz comes up to her and he's already allowed her, they're allowing her to glean. They've obeyed the law here. They've provided for her. Boaz has no more obligation to her. And yet he comes up to her and he gives her three things. Keep close to my young women. Stay in my field. In other words, act like you're part of my household. He gives her status. And he says in verse 9, I've told the young men not to touch you. No one's going to assault you or harass you. He's given her safety. And then he also says, and when you're thirsty, go and drink from what my young men have drawn. He gives her sustenance as well. He provides for those needs. He goes above and beyond. And the question, that begs the question, why? Why would he go above and beyond? I mean, we get the sense that there's sort of, he's noticed her, if you get my meaning. Boaz has noticed her. But why would he go above and beyond? And Ruth wonders the same thing. And this is the first key moment in verse 10. She falls on the ground, bowing in front of him, and says, why have I found favor? Why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me since I am a foreigner? Why have you been so gracious towards me? She says, I am only a foreigner, a widow. I'm dirt poor. I've got nothing. I've done nothing to deserve this. And so Boaz responds in verse 11, and he says, because all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, so you've taken care of your mother-in-law. You committed to her. You remember that wonderful commitment of Ruth's to Naomi, but more to the God of Israel. And you've left your father and your mother and the people you knew in your homeland. You've forsaken all of those comforts, all of that security, and you've committed yourself to Naomi. But actually more so, he says in verse 12, you have taken refuge under the wings of the God of Israel. What a wonderful picture. It's the image of a baby bird, a foster baby bird who's lost its mother, taking refuge under the wings of a foster parent. You've taken wings. You're trusting in the God of Israel, the true God, the living God. And so Boaz says, and so I want to bless you. His care for you is coming through me, and more so in the future, actually. She's chosen to take refuge under God's wings. And so she's ready for redemption. I want you to take two things from this first part of the story from Ruth. The first is that God is at work. The author is at pains. He's saying, look at Boaz. Look at, she chanced to chance upon. He's saying, this is not an accident. God is at work providentially through history. That idea of providence means that he has the right to do it, and he does it in a way that's both wise and good. In other words, we can trust him. But the point of this is that God is a God of grace. We see that in Boaz. He's a God of grace who cares for those who love and trust him, and he is at work even when it doesn't seem like it. We know this from the story of Jesus. That's why we read Galatians chapter 4 earlier. In the fullness of time, when the time was complete, when everything had been accomplished, Jesus was born of a woman as a man. God is at work through history in the midst of our darkness. While we were yet sinners, is another verse in Romans chapter 5. While we were yet sinners, while we were powerless, Christ died for us at just the right time. There's two phrases, in the fullness of time, at just the right time. Slightly different, but this idea that God is at work, and he's good, and he's in control, and he's wise. We see that in Jesus. We rejoice in that this Advent season, this Christmas season, that we know that he's seen it in the past. We've seen it in Jesus. He's at work. He does things at just the right time. What does that mean for us? Can I suggest to you that we need to be like Ruth? She was trusting the promises. She trusted the provision of God in the law of the land. We need to trust God because he's trustworthy. We've just said that. He's at work behind the scenes through history and all the complexity and the messiness. We need to trust him by doing what? The next right thing. What I mean is this, oftentimes, what does it mean to trust God in the day-to-day? Can I suggest to you that often that means doing the next right thing? Ruth did that. We're here, we're in Bethlehem, we need to eat. God's made provision for me to go glean. I'm going to go do it. That's why Paul puts these two things together in 2 Corinthians. In chapter 1, he says, all of God's promises are yes in Christ Jesus. In other words, God is always faithful to his promises. He is working. He's in charge. And then he says later in chapter 5, and we walk by faith and not by sight. That's the New Testament anchor for this idea. And so often the next right thing is really obvious. When you're in crisis, when something's going on at work, I've got all kinds of stuff and there's an issue, there's a situation here and I don't know what to do. Often the next right thing is really obvious. Go home. Do the dishes for my wife. Go home, be a good father to my children. Work hard, preach the word. Do what the Lord has called you to, the obvious stuff. That's what Ruth does. That's what we're called to do because we know that God is at work behind the scenes. Are you tracking with me? Does that make sense? Yeah? Do the next right thing. This morning, I don't know, maybe you feel like your whole life is in crisis. Maybe there's one area of your life that is in crisis. There's a situation, maybe it's personal, maybe it's your wider, maybe it's at work, I don't know. But trust the Lord and do that by doing the next right thing. Whatever it is after this service, whatever the next right, maybe it's going home and having lunch with your family and being invested in your family. Maybe it's you need to call someone and encourage them. Maybe, I don't know what that next right, I suspect it's actually pretty obvious. That's what I've discovered in my life. Do the next right thing. And that's what trusting God looks like in the everyday, really, really practically. Ruth is ready for redemption. There's not a clock in this room, is there? I'm going to pull my phone out so I can see it. Ruth is ready for redemption. And then there's this second idea of recognizing redemption, which we see in the form of Naomi down in verse 20. You see, Ruth has a wonderful day. Actually, Boaz goes even further above and beyond in verses 14 through 16. He invites her to come eat at his table. He says, actually, you don't have to wait until my people have gone through. You can actually go and glean amongst them. And they're going to actually let some stuff, well, he doesn't actually tell her that, but they let some sheaves fall, and she goes home, and she's got almost more than she can carry. That's the image here. She goes home, and she's gleaned way more than you would expect for someone to be able to glean in her position. And Naomi notices. Now, in this chapter, Naomi has spoken all of 3 words. Go, my daughter. She's come back home from Moab, and she said, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara. She's empty. I get a little bit of the sense that she's demotivated. She's trusting, but she's hanging on by a thread in a sense. And Ruth gets home, and she's got a full arm of grain. She's been blessed. And Naomi goes, where did you glean today? Where did you glean today? And Ruth tells her in verse 19, she says, the man's name with whom I worked today is Boaz. And all of a sudden, Naomi recognizes the Redeemer. And she says in verse 20, may he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living, that's Ruth and Naomi, or the dead, that's their husbands who have died. And she said to her, this man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers. Yes. Naomi has suddenly caught a glimpse of redemption, of the Redeemer. She's recognized him. She's seen, I know, this is not just chance. Something's happening here. Friends, when we catch a glimpse of the Redeemer, our Redeemer, not Boaz, Jesus, when we catch a glimpse of the Redeemer, 3 things happen. We see them here in Naomi. The first thing is that hope is reborn. Naomi she goes from saying, go, my daughter, do what you have to do the next right thing, to, something's happening here. I'm getting excited. I've got a spark of hope. Hope is reborn. Not only has God not forsaken the living, but he has not forsaken the dead either. We're going to come back to that in a minute. The second is that she says to Ruth, it's good. Go out, keep doing what you're doing. Keep on, carry on. She's gotten a new sense of perseverance, of endurance. Keep gleaning. And lastly, just to look ahead into chapter 3, she says, my daughter, go down to the threshing floor to Boaz. She's willing to take a risk. She's stepping out in faith. We'll look at that in a second. She knows that God is at work. She's got a part to play. And so she says, listen, we could take a risk. We could step out here. We're going to put we're going to put everything on the line with this one. She's got a sense of not risk from the human perspective, but trust, faith from God's perspective. Recognizing the Redeemer renews hope, it renews perseverance, and it renews faith. The kids and I at the minute are reading this book that my parents passed. They don't even remember they gave it to us. But it's a story, or it's an Advent story. It's one for every day of Advent. We've been skipping ahead because we're enjoying the story. Don't tell anyone. But it's the story of a fictional shepherd boy called Jotham. And Jotham is separated from his parents who are shepherds. You can kind of see where this is going. But along the way, he meets real people. He encounters real people from the biblical account. And so he's running away from the bad guys, and this friend of his, Nathan, takes him to a priest's house, and he gets to the priest's house, and it turns out that the priest's name is Zechariah, and his wife's name is Elizabeth, and they've had their baby, and the baby's name is John, and they start telling Jotham about what the Lord, about Zechariah's prophecy and his being mute and what's going to happen. And he discovers that actually there's another one in someone else who's pregnant in Bethlehem who's called Mary, and his uncle is Joseph. It's a story for kids. But as I'm reading this story, and it pulls out this idea that God is at work behind the scenes. And I was sitting there, I was almost in tears at one point with my kids, just in marveling at the way that the Lord, remembering the story, remembering what he's done, and just marveling at how he did it and how in charge he is. I caught a glimpse of the Redeemer. When was the last time you caught a glimpse of the Redeemer, of your Redeemer? When was the last time you sat there and marveled? When was the last time you thought, I got to shut my door and get on my knees because I'm just in awe of my Savior? When was the last time you met Jesus? Naomi catches a glimpse of the Redeemer. The second thing, just really quickly, this idea of the kinsman Redeemer tells us something really important about the nature of Redeemer. And this is our little lens through which we look at Advent. Naomi says, this man is a close relative of ours. He is one of our redeemers. You see, there's a couple of key things. The Redeemer has to be of the same family. He's of Elimelech's family. He needs to belong to the same. Can't just be anybody who can be a Redeemer. He needs to be of the same family. And actually, Boaz says later, actually, there's someone closer than I. It's not just being the same family. It's actually, there's a legal proceeding here as well that actually it needs to be the person who's the closest has the first right, and then so on. And that's why we read, again, Galatians chapter 4 this morning, that Jesus was born of a woman. He became part of our family. He was born of a woman, born under the law, so that he has the right to redeem us. Born as a man, he's a human. He's allowed to take our place on the cross, allowed to take our punishment, and he's born under the law as well. Legally, he's allowed to redeem. John chapter 1 tells us how that happened. It says that he came and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Eugene Peterson's The Message puts it this way. He came and he moved into the neighborhood. He tabernacled amongst us. Tabernacle is different. The literal word is tabernacled amongst us. But the Message says he put on flesh like clothes, and he came and he moved into the neighborhood. Yeah? Jesus came for us. He became part of our family, the human family. And that's what we remember this Advent season as well. Ruth is ready for redemption. Naomi recognizes redemption. And lastly, they receive redemption. They receive redemption. They trust in the Redeemer's noble character, and Ruth and Naomi as well place themselves into his hands. I don't know if you've read chapter 3 much. I read chapter 3 this week and thought, this is a love story. I mean, it's subtle, but it's there. Naomi says to Ruth, Boaz, the harvest is finished. Boaz is going to be, they're going to have a festival. They're going to have a feast tonight. Boaz is going to be on the threshing floor. So wash yourself and anoint yourself. Put on your cloak and go down to the threshing floor. Wait until he's finished, until he lies down. Observe the place where he lies. Uncover his feet, lie down, and he will tell you what to do. And Ruth replies, I'll do all that you do. This passage confuses us. It confuses commentators as well. Because there's a little bit of ambiguity here. What's Naomi doing? This seems a little bit risque. This seems a little bit unwise. Telling a young woman to go down to the threshing floor in secret in the middle of the night and uncover his feet what's going on here? Can I suggest to you that the author purposefully leaves ambiguity in this story? Because these are desperate times. These are desperate. This is the time of the judges where every man did as he saw fit. Ruth and Naomi, there's provision for it, but in their case, the mother-in-law is widowed. Ruth is a foreigner who's with her. I mean, this is the exception to the norm of the provision, that the provision accounts for. There's not really much. What are they meant to do in this case? Naomi's responsible for her. She says, ought I not to seek rest for you? In other words, a good marriage, a good home, a future, a family. It's the time of the judge. This is a family affair as well. Boaz is related. It's a small town. Everybody knows what's going on. Everybody knows the need. Everybody knows the rules about the kinsman redeemer. We don't know whether this was a particular tradition, what Naomi told Ruth to do, whether it was sort of this. Boaz seems to gets the idea, so it sort of seems like there might have been. But historically, we don't know. So there's an ambiguity about this passage. But actually, the author makes it really clear that actually the risk is no risk at all because of the character of the three people involved. Boaz, remember, is a worthy man. He's a good man. He's a righteous man. And Naomi, we just heard her praising the Lord, knowing that he's at work in chapter 2 and verse 20. And in verse 4 in chapter 3, she says, trust Boaz, he will tell you what to do. Naomi's righteous, Boaz is righteous, he's trusting the Lord. And Ruth is, this is a wonderful little detail. Down in chapter 3 and verse 11, Boaz says to Ruth, you are a worthy woman. Everybody knows that you are a worthy woman. That's the same word, worthy. It's different from the one used about Boaz, but it's the same word that's used about the Proverbs 31 woman. And in the Hebrew Bible, Ruth is situated right after Proverbs. So Proverbs 31 ends with the 31 woman, and Ruth comes up. And Boaz says, she is a worthy, a righteous woman. And so there's ambiguity because these are desperate times. This is life. People have to survive. We got to do something here. But the author says, despite the ambiguity of it, despite the risk of it, the trust in God that it requires, actually, all three of them are righteous people trusting in the Lord. And yet, Naomi forces the issue a little bit. She sends Ruth down to the threshing floor. But actually, because of the character of the Redeemer, it's no risk at all. We can throw ourselves on Christ's mercy. We can give ourselves and surrender ourselves entirely to him because of who he is. It's a relational thing. It's not an institutional thing. It's not because of his position. It's because of who he is, him as a person, and because we know him. We can trust him. And here's where I want to end today, is that Ruth goes down to the threshing floor. At midnight, Boaz is startled. And he discovers a woman laying at his feet. And he says, logical, who are you? She's got a cloak over her. He can't necessarily see her. Who are you? And she says, I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. Oh, couples have inside jokes. Boaz said to Ruth earlier, you have taken refuge under the wings of the God of Israel. And Ruth says here, the same word for skirt or wings, spread your wings over me. Wink, wink. Spread your wings over me. This, friends, is a marriage proposal. This is a marriage proposal. To be a kinsman redeemer means to marry the wife, the widow, so that you can provide an heir for her dead husband. That's why Naomi said, you have not forgotten the living or the dead. Sometimes we think about redemption as just about guilt and innocence, right and wrong. The image I usually use is Jesus bought us back from the marketplace of sin. He took us from what was evil. But when we get to this idea, when we just have this idea of redemption is about right and wrong, we're not sinners anymore. We're good. We've missed the heart of redemption, because redemption is about romance, and we see that with Ruth and Boaz. Redemption is about land. It's about family. It's about inheritance and legacy. It's about rest. That's what Naomi says. Should I not seek rest for you, my daughter? It's about rest. It's about safety, belonging. It's about love and intimacy, because this is a redemption. So it is about redemption, and at the heart of it is marriage, love and intimacy, belonging. As a man, sometimes I struggle with that language of romance. Just being honest. But we get a picture of that in David. David and Jonathan. In 1 Samuel chapter 18, it says that Jonathan's soul was knit to the soul of David. In 2 Samuel chapter, where's my note? 23. We've got David and his men of valor. And David says, I'm thirsty. Oh, what I wouldn't give for a drink from my hometown of Bethlehem behind enemy lines. And two of his men go out and break through the lines and get him a drink and come back. And David is so moved by their act of devotion to him that he pours out the drink as a drink offering before the Lord. That sounds a little scandalous to us, a little sort of like, seriously, you poured it out? But a drink offering was a thing. It was a sacred thing to do, to honor what they had done for him. And so in the same breath that it's about romance and intimacy and love, it's about passion and devotion. It's about honor and respect, love, service, strength, and gentleness. Jesus, for my brothers in the room, Jesus calls us co-workers, brothers, friends. There's a passion there. We're blood brothers with him. Redemption is about romance. It's about us belonging to Jesus, as a wife belongs to a husband and as a husband belongs to a wife. Paul puts it this way in Philippians chapter 3. Ephesians, get there. Philippians chapter 3. In verses 7 and 8. But whatever gain I had, he's just gone through everything, all of his stuff he's done in this life. Whatever gain I had, I counted as loss for the sake of Christ. Indeed, I count everything as loss. Man, we translate that word really nicely. I count everything as a rubbish heap, as trash. I could get more explicit because the language actually probably is, but I won't. Count everything as loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing about Christ. Is that what it says? Knowing about Christ? No, it says knowing Christ. Knowing him, not knowing about him, knowing him personally, belonging to him, intimacy with him, devotion, passion for his name. And again, Galatians 4 gives us the full picture. in the fullness of time, God sent forth his son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem, there's that word, to redeem those who were under the law so that, here's the full picture of redemption, so that we might receive adoption as sons, family, belonging, love. And because you are sons, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into your hearts, crying, Abba, there's the intimacy. Abba, Father. And so you are no longer a slave, but a son and a daughter, a child of God. Do you have that spark? I don't want to get into emotionalism, but there is emotion, passion. Jesus wants all of us. He wants your emotions. He wants your emotions. He wants your mind. He wants your strength. He wants all of you engaged in him. Passion is not just emotional. It's physical as well. You go do something. Has your relationship with Jesus lost its spark? What do you need to get it back again? Maybe it never had a spark. Can I suggest to you, if that spark, that lack of a spark, it's not an ongoing spark, it's sometimes it's coals, but that sense of every so often you look at Jesus and go, oh, yes, I love my wife, but every so often I look at her and go, I can't believe we're married. And she looks at me, it's ridiculous. I don't do that all the time. I can't believe we're not married. No. But where's that spark? Where's that spark? If you never had it, can I suggest to you that you need the Lord Jesus to come and redeem you? You need that fullness of his redemption. That's what Fanny Crosby says, the fullness of your redemption. And that hymn we sing sometimes.